out of the water earlier today. So this, I swear that was out of the water this morning. This was out of the water last week. In fact, the water was like right about here on it. The last 2 years prior, when I came in, it was below this little one because of the drought.
Wow.
So depending on what's happening on the surface, it depends on what's happening in the cave with the water. The more water on the surface, the more water we have in the cave. Now, pool formations are going to occur because, again, as the water comes into the cave, it's bringing in the calcite. That calcite, when it gets into big pools like this, becomes so saturated in the water that it creates calcite rafts. So that scummy look to the surface of the water, that's actually calcite, okay? It's lighter than the water, so it precipitates up. So if you've ever dumped sugar in tea and watched some of it settle to the bottom, you've put so much sugar in, no more can dissolve. Mm-hmm. And sugar is heavier than water. The calcite's doing the same thing. There's so much calcite in this water, no more can dissolve, but it's lighter, so it gets up onto the surface and creates these raft cones, or these rafts. Now, these raft cones are caused because if you look over at, like, let's do this one. See all the calcite rafts over this one? There's a drip on the ceiling that drips occasionally. And as soon as it drips and hits one of these calcite rafts that's right over it, it'll sink it. And then they build up and create raft cones. So slow process. They're not always growing because sometimes the water is below them. That's why some of these have drill holes in the top, because the drip doesn't necessarily stop even when the water is not above it. So it'll continue to interact with that raft cone. Now, that shelf stone I showed you, that's happening because notice how there's a nice big chunk of calcite right here. If it continues to do that and covers the water, making a thin layer of calcite, kind of like the first freeze on a lake, it'll continue to do that and build up until it makes shelf stone. And it can support itself.
Oh, so there will be running water beneath and there will be a hole there.
Sometimes there's running water beneath, sometimes it's still like this. Perfectly still. The other formation type we have in here that's a pool formation, all these little bumps on the wall, there are so many more under the water currently that you cannot see. Those are botryoids. And again, they're happening because the calcite rafts are bumping up against the wall, and also because the water is so full of calcite, it's clinging to things. And so it's creating those botryoids, which are usually either underwater or covered in mud. And most of them are underwater right now because of the flooding. So they're usually out of water right here. The water is blue for the same reason. So calcite refracts light in a way that makes it look turquoise blue or light blue. The water is so deep right now it's looking turquoise blue. But when it gets shallower, it kind of refracts in a light blue way. That's why it's called Blue Lake. But because it's not consistent.
What's the highest you typically see it?
I've never seen it any higher than what it is right now.
Oh, wow.
But I have a coworker on the surface that's come in and it's right up to the bridge.
Oh.
And I've heard that it can get on the bridge sometimes.
Did anyone dive in?
No, nobody's dived in there before. So 48 degrees, depending on the depth of the water, depends on how cold it is. Most of the water is probably not even 40 degrees in this cave, so we don't go in there. But
How did they build this bridge?
Well, there was a bridge here before. And if my understanding is they waited until this lake was at its lowest, kind of like probably it was last year because of the drought.
Yeah.
And then they were able to come in and out a little bit easier. So that's my understanding. But there was a bridge here before the DNR purchased property. They just reinforced it and built a more sturdy one. So, yeah. And you can kind of see some of these. I haven't asked the geologist, but I suspect, see that line right there?
Mm-hmm, the crack kind
I
of.
suspect that's where the water tends to be a lot on that one. And so it's just kind of rubbing it and eroding it for that one. It kind of does that with this one too. There's kind of this break in there. So
Yeah, that's more visible.
yeah, that one's a little bit more clear cut. That one's a little less clear cut, but yeah. So it's really, really hard to tell anybody. I know you're probably looking like, oh, well, it's usually like 10 feet deep. It's really, really hard to tell you that because it very much fluctuates.
Right.
When I came in the cave today, I haven't been in here since Sunday last week. So I just was not sure how deep this water was going to be because it could have already started draining. I came in Sunday after all the flooding and the rain, and we could hear it in the back pouring in, and it was not this high. So the cracks this is going through and draining through are small, so it's not quick, but I just wasn't sure where it was gonna, like, just never know where this is gonna be at. It's a guessing game. It's anybody's guess. So I was pleasantly surprised. And like I said, I swear to that was out of the water this morning. So that means we probably got a little bit more water trickling in back there. We are supposed to get rain, so it'll get a little bit higher in the next couple days. And then we'll see how it does get to the point where it's so high sometimes it starts going that way over that rock fall right there. So. And then it drains this way. Like, there's a hole off to the left that'll drain down, so it doesn't go the whole way we're going, but it does drain this way for a little while with us if it gets high enough. And that coworker that's seen it up to the bridge, that's when she saw it draining down this way. So. We used to have guiding tape here. We replaced it with rocks, and those rocks are built up, not because there's a formation that we don't want you to step on, but if it starts getting high enough that it drains, it literally drains right there.
Oh.
So. We put the rocks to keep people from stepping in mud. So. I'm pretty sure it brings like a little crack somewhere right around here. There's a bigger hole further down, but I'm pretty sure it like disappears right about here usually. So. One thing that I'm kind of excited to show you guys, I don't get a chance to really show people very often because my tours are too big. And we're single file right here, but that cephalopod that I showed you, that was a cut through the shell. This right here, see this nice little rounded section? Oh, yeah. That is the outside of a cephalopod shell. So there is a cephalopod in the rock right here. Now these are routinely found in limestone quarries up to 15 and 20 feet long. The largest ever recorded that I've heard so far is the length of a school bus. So these were probably the apex predators in the Ordovician Sea at that time. So, yeah.
It's so difficult to find out, and you find out.
Yeah, and so when I was looking at the ceiling and I was talking about a fossil, one of my coworkers thinks he might see one that's like 15 feet long like this, where it's the outside shell, and it's really, really hard to tell from that far down. That's why we were looking up. We were discussing this one. He's never seen it, but I don't have any great way to be like, it is, you know. Yeah. So he'd have to come on somebody's tour who knows where it is to be able to find it. Yeah. Or to see it.
Does he have a lot of tall tales, or do people believe him?
No, he's one of the geologists actually,
oh,
so
okay.
He could be right about it being in that one, but the one that he was telling me about, it was the third dome in that walkway, so that's why I was looking for it, because we have a good marker to like look up at that point, and like I said, coming down this way, I don't have any way to tell him where to look for that. So we were actually discussing that before you guys came.
Keep something here.
Yeah, I could set something there for him to see. But if you noticed, I kind of was angling my head funny because as you come up to it, it's not as defined. So it's harder to see as you come up to it. You have to like come around to the side. So yeah, I would literally have to set something for him to stop and look up at it. But yeah, I don't get to show very many people, like I said, because the tours are usually about 20 people. And when we get single file right here this way, it's hard to show that thing. So that's why most of my coworkers don't know where it is, because we just don't get a chance to show the other ones.
So we are the lucky ones.
You are the lucky ones. Yeah, I don't get a lot of people like that. Usually our tours are, like I said, pretty big, and they're a little harder to do. So I do want to point out a couple of things before we head into our next stop. This crack right here, you guys are welcome to come all the way down the stairs and see it. Okay.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Take your time. I'd rather you be careful than have to explain to my coworkers why I'm running out without everyone in my group. So this crack right here, if you glance down in there, that is to 5th Avenue. So that is after the ramp, but before that cephalopod fossil I showed you.
Wow.
Now, the ramp is where we're going to be headed out. We'll have basically circled around. It's not quite a circle. It's not quite an oval either. But that ramp is straight that way. And that's why we're not going that way. We do have to do Tall Man's Misery. Before we do Tall Man's Misery, I do want to show you. Again, I don't get to show very many people. But it's not very well preserved, but that is a cephalopod right there.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah,
we got lucky. It started to get eroded, or the mud started to come off of it, and we just noticed it like a year or two ago. Wow. So, unfortunately, it's not the best preserved. We might be able to take a brush and like expose more right there, or it's been rubbed. I can't tell for sure, but yeah, there's a cephalopod right there.
Would this like circle be a part of it too? That?
Yeah, the rib starts.
This right here. So, that might be a gastropod right there. That circle with the little, or that's a little one, maybe. I'm not sure. Now I have to point that out to the geologist when we come down. We'll have to ask her. They get mad at me when I come down here because I notice all the little things. And then they have to come in and figure out what I'm talking about. So this is tall man's misery. I'm 5'9". I'm squatting and I'm crouching, or I'm bending over. So watch your head. It's not very far, and then we'll pop up and be able to stand up. There is another fossil. There's a ton of them in the rock right there. I want to show you guys. It's really tiny, but we'll talk about it when we get over there. How's that sound?
Yeah.
Sure.
Here we go.
Okay, bend.
Yeah. Careful, watch your head.
Sure.
So our last fossil I can show you is actually all over in the walls here. So some of the biggest ones are right here next to me. But see all these little Cheerio-shaped little dots in the wall? Those are crinoids. They were animals alive during the Ordovician period. So if you don't know what sea lilies are, Google it when you get home. They are actually an animal, but they look like a lily. They're little animals that stack on top of each other, making basically a stem-looking feature, and then they have these little like gill things at the top, okay? These would have done the same, so not sea lilies, probably not very closely related, but the best I can show you is there's one right here, and there's 3 of them stacked. You can barely see the lines, so right here. You guys want to step forward and look at them?
Okay.
So right here, you can kind of see the lines of the 3 that are stacked there. So these little guys, like I said, would have been alive during the Ordovician period. They're animals, and they would have stacked on each other and created a formation of an animal, so like sea lilies. For those of you who are curious, bugs, like built up iron just sticking out. You're gonna see some further that are just like sticking way out of the wall, and then there's some that just barely stick out. So we're gonna go down Diamond's Caverns, and since the group is so small, we'll stop and talk about the things I want you to see. Usually I like warn people to look, but we're small, so we can stop and talk. 20 people through here single file is really, really hard, but this is better. So the first thing I want to show you, because it's the biggest section I can, is right here. As you're coming past, there's 2 lines. That's actually calcite crystals.
2 lines?
So right here.
Oh, yeah.
So calcite crystals require a lot of space and time to form, and so this doesn't happen very often. You'll see a couple of them here. And I'm like 100% positive that is a gastropod. So see that swirl right there? There's a bunch of crinoids with it, but
Yeah. Hey, you wanna come?
so, right there. See that little swirl?
Yeah. Huh.
I'm gonna get to the top and tell the geologists they're gonna yell at me.
You have it here, so
Yeah.
show it to them.
Proof. So there's a good example of the bugs I was talking about that look attractive. So, all right. So when I was talking about the manganese being black and it being deposited and then staining the formations black, we've got a couple here. We'll get up to one of them, and then I'll show you. So as you can see, there's black right here. This is flowstone, okay? As it's coming down, it's depositing the manganese with the calcite, so it's building up. But you'll notice some of it is getting opaque. Right there is really opaque. That's because eventually it runs out of manganese and it stops depositing it, but it keeps putting calcite over it. So eventually the calcite will build up and you won't be able to see the black anymore. But we do have manganese, and those are pockets of manganese are found in rock that were ocean at one point and still found in pockets in the ocean today, in the ocean floors today. So it's another piece of evidence that this was at one point an ocean. So, as we continue walking, the walls are scalloped. This bumpy kind of swooping edges, this is called scalloping. And in just a moment, we're going to start sparkling quite a bit more than we currently are. And as we do that, that is gypsum. Okay, so right about here is where we really get the sparkle going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So nice.
I'll leave you guys to it. I'll be quiet and let you guys enjoy the sparkle and the scalloping, and then we'll talk about what that is caused by in just a moment when we get to the end of the tunnel.
Frosty.
I know.
It's
so
frosty.
pretty.
So this is why it's called Diamond's Cavern, though. So, as you guys are coming out, what I want you to know about the scalloping and the gypsum is that scalloping is caused by moving water. Large scallops are caused by fast moving water. Small scallops are caused by slow. Those are technically large. So that means this passage at one point was not only underwater, but had fast moving water through it. The reason that that's interesting is because the gypsum that sparkles is something that requires very, very dry conditions. That means this passage at one point was completely underwater with fast moving water, and over years, thousands, hundreds of years, it dried out and gypsum was capable of forming. So it kind of gives us an idea of what could potentially happen anywhere in the cave. Given that this section was carved out by a river that isn't around anymore, and the other section is being created and flooded still to this day by a river that probably wasn't over there at the time this was over here, it gives us an idea of what things could happen. Yeah, it's the last tour of the day going past the, yeah, there.
Oh, it's the entry
30
from
minutes
there.
late. Anyways, it gives us kind of an idea of how things could change. That also means any little crack you've seen in the bedrock that isn't currently a passage could eventually be a passage. If we get enough water in here and it starts eroding the cracks again, it's going to give us more passages and deeper passages and maybe even further down in that one passage. Before we head all the way out, closing, there is manganese and iron in this dome. It is dripstone and flowstone, and gives us a real pretty formation right here in what we call the dome. Yeah. So we're gonna head for the ramp, and we're just about at time, and we're gonna head back out towards the surface as we go. But if you have questions, feel free to ask as we go. I do ask, though, when we're on the ramp, that you give each other some space, you use the handrail, and you take it slow, because it is a little slick. My shoes don't really slide. They are rated for oil slick, so I rarely slide in the cave. I'm sliding on this today, so just be very careful. That's what Jake was trying to fix, was how slick this is. She paused, so she's gonna kick some butt. Hopefully she doesn't leave me. She did pause our speech, which means it threw her off when I did that. So we'll see if she tries to leave me tonight. We kind of, I say it's oval. If you look at the map, it is a little bit of a square at Fat Man's Missouri, but then we end up like pinching together and then we go out of tails. So not quite an oval, not quite a square, but we've gone in a circle basically. Are you kidding me? That's new. Okay, those are nuts.
Ooh.
Or shells of a nuts.
Oh, I got a squirrel down here?
Mice, chipmunks, sometimes raccoons.
Uh-huh.
Occasionally.
Interesting.
So, But I didn't know we had one coming in this little crevice. That was the first time I've noticed the little shells right there. That's why when we were in what we call Fifth Avenue, where she is right now, I don't know if you noticed, but I was looking at the ceiling, but I was also doing this because I was looking in the passages, the little holes, to see if we got a new mouse or chipmunk.
So do you catch them, or do you still let them come?
Do you want the Disney story, or do you want the truth? So cave ecosystems are really food-starved ecosystems. So typically in cave ecosystems, cave animals that are specially adapted to live here are very small because there's not a lot of food. So insects, spiders, crustaceans. If you have enough food consistently coming in, you can get larger species. That is usually caused by what we call cave visitors. Well, bats are taught in school to be cave animals. They're not, they're cave visitors. They come in here to do something and then they have to leave. They can't survive in here. The raccoons, the squirrel, the chipmunks, the mice, and the bats are all cave visitors. And so they do things in here and sometimes they don't leave and they become the food. So no, I don't usually try to chase them down because if they don't get out, they're just feeding something in here. They usually, if they're in here, they're typically going to stay near their exits and entrances. So they're basically using the cave as a burrow to either warm up in the winter, cool off in the summer, or hide from a predator. But again, if they get too far away from the crevices that they normally use, they can get lost because it's completely dark in here. And their night vision doesn't work in this environment. So they can get lost and not be able to get back up to the surface. That is a possibility. And no, I don't really interact with them very often. A lot of times I've seen a mouse in here a couple of times. A lot of times they're just running from us anyways, so it's almost impossible to pull them out once they come in because they don't stay still long enough for us to.
So you don't put the rat traps and all, at least to catch them and put them out?
No, they're part of the ecosystem, so they should be here. Sort of. So.
We were looking at that plate that's kind of just floating.
Yeah, so if you want to go back to it, I usually I point this out in my geology tour. I don't usually have time to do it on my lantern tour, but you guys noticed it. So this is shelfstone. Okay. So the one thing I do want to point out though is that shelfstone has stalagmites growing on it, right? What people don't understand about stalagmites is they start from boreholes from the water dripping down. And as that borehole happens, eventually it starts filling with calcite and it gives us a root. So see those roots down there?
Kidding. I didn't see that.
So most stalagmites you see, there's more of it under the surface.
It's like a nail.
We got really, really lucky. This shelfstone was thick enough and could support its own weight. So when water came down and undermined it, it exposed that and it stayed up. It didn't all stay up. This is a chunk of the shelfstone, and those are roots from stalagmites that are on the other side. So we didn't do this. It just happened with flooding, and we just got lucky that it exposed those roots. So.
It's really cool.
Yeah, for the most part, you'll never see the roots of a stalagmite ever, but in occasionally rare situations, stuff like that happens.
So the rippling, is that water coming down then?
Yeah, that's flowstone on the wall, and it's probably classified as ribbon. That's one of the few subcategories of flowstone. So ribbon or curtains sometimes.
That's really cool for me.
Yeah. Cool.
This pattern is also nice here.
Yeah, so some of it's over here too, and there's some.
Yeah.
Nice pattern form, right? Nature has it.
Yep. So we have some more flowstone on the wall here. A little less ribbony and more just straight down, and it's brought in some other organic material or minerals that's really staining it kind of that real mustardy yellow.
Yeah.
So. All right, so we are right at time, and we are back at the entrance. So I'm going to ask that you, when you get up to the surface, turn off your flashlights and put them back where you grabbed them from, so on those benches. And then you're welcome to unlock the door and head out and clean your shoes. Just keep in mind as you go up those stairs, those are 50-something steps in like almost 60 feet. So if you're winded at the top, it's because the elevation is really, really steep. So if you're in good shape and you feel like you're winded and you shouldn't be, no, it's, unless you're from Colorado, this is the thing. So go right ahead. I'm gonna go up behind you guys so I make sure that door gets closed.
Oh, okay.
How far down this go that way?
Quite a ways actually, before it dead ends. There's a couple of different passages that way that dead end.
This does not have light at all.
It's real hard. That's another hard question. People are like, well, how far does this go? How far does this go? Well, 13 miles of dead ends. Take your pick. One passage might go 10 feet, one might go 20,
Right.
one might go, 100. There's one good main branch that you can pretty much follow through the whole thing, but some of it is kind of angled funny, so it doesn't look like one main branch.
How much of it do you think you've gone through?
Half a mile of the lantern, 0.6 miles for the geology, quarter of a mile for the scenic. That's all I ever do. So maybe 2 miles.
Sure.
Other than that,
You haven't explored
mile and a half.
non-visitor portions?
No, a lot of it requires hands and knees crawling.
Oh, sure.